So looks like we were all wrong about the AGENTS.md and our claude.md. For a long time I've been recommending to be as extensive as you can. Put there all the details that might matter to your AGENTS.md. Surprise, according to some studies, looks like it was the wrong thing to do. For a long time, most of the recommendations regarding AI have been based on personal taste or personal experience, but never something quite scientific. That's changing. And ETH Zurich has run a study evaluating the impact of files like the agents.md or claude.md if you are using Claude Code, for example. The goal was to understand if those files actually help. Not only the files when they are generated by the machine or when they are manually crafted. And the surprise is that the study concluded that having an agents.md can make the agent perform worse in most cases. Even when having an agents.md that is manually curated, it can perform worse in most cases. But that leads to the question, why it fails? There's three main reasons for that. The first one is overgeneralization. Let's say that in your agents.md you write something as innocent as always apply the factory design pattern. And when you write that, you are thinking about certain scenarios. But since the way that the agent works is based on obeying to your instructions and the agents.md or claude.md act like the constitution of that project, now what will happen is that the agent will try to apply the factory design pattern in most cases, even when it's not needed. And I know you are thinking, okay, that's a terrible line because you said always apply, but there's other reasons as well. Let's go to the next one. And this one is redundancy. Why? Because let's say that in your agent.md you write the basic folder structure. So you explain in the agents.md how you typically organize your project. Let's say that you usually use something like the MVC pattern and you have models, views, and controllers. Or let's say that you follow a structure of feature folders. But you explain how do you organize those features, you explain where do you usually put something like infrastructure concerns, like the repository or a service, or even, for example, a given endpoint. So you explain all of that in the agents.md. Where's the redundancy? The redundancy is in the fact that nowadays the agents can discover that by their own. So they can quickly evaluate your code and understand how do you usually organize things. Then they can easily discover where have you put things before. So that can lead to redundancy in terms of information or even contradicting information. Because on one hand, you might have the agents.md that there's a risk of being not updated. And you, on the other side, you have the results of a scan by the agent itself. So now you have two conflicting informations that might lead to a poor result. They observed that in the study. And that connects to the final one, that is outdated. Why? Agents.md looks like documentation, like something that is inside of a wiki somewhere. And usually that type of documentation tends to have a problem. That is, it's quite easy to stay in the past. At some point we might change things and we forget to update that part of the document. The same thing can happen in our agents.md, claude.md, whatever. So there's a risk that at a given point, the instructions that are there are not relevant anymore, or they might be misleading. Let's say that you start a given project by using something as simple as SQLite until the moment that you decide which database provider you want to use. So during the development, in the first moment, you go there and you write the guide for a database migration, let's say. So you write that based on the idea of SQLite. But at a given point, you finally take the decision of the database that you want to use. You might go to the agents.md and in the top, you explain the technologies you are using. But you forget that you used to have a migration guide because you were dealing with certain problems from SQLite, let's say. So for a while, you will have two contradicting informations based on the fact that the document was actually outdated. And that can lead to the agent to perform work that isn't needed, until the moment that the agent will realize that it can perform that task. So you might be spending time, computing time, tokens. You might be having that cost without the benefits of having the information in the agents.md. So the bottom line is that the agents.md will be used as a constitution, as a rule that needs to be obeyed. So at first, when the agent starts, it will naturally pull all of that information into the context window, so we'll use that as a reference. The question is if that instruction is actually valuable, is adding value or not. Because otherwise, it's just consuming context that is a scarce resource and also increasing the cost. So based on this study, I changed my mind. Nowadays, I don't recommend anymore adding every single thing into the agents.md. Okay, there's other places where we should put certain things. So how do we approach the agents.md? So it's important that the agents.md stays simple, global enough, so in the sense that is general applicable, because the agents.md will be part of the context of the chat in every single request that you do to the provider, to the agent provider, to the LLM. So that those instructions will stay there in every single conversation. So it's important that we are a bit more mindful on the things that we put there. So we want a concise document, but still a document with the important informations there. So how do I approach the problem nowadays? So I might start with something quite complete. Let's say that I start by running the /init to generate the first version, but then I start working on that to simplify it. And my process has basically 3 different steps. I go through each section of my agents.md and I ask a couple of questions. The first one is, does this apply to every single task? Is this an important information that the agent should consider in every single iteration that we have, or in 95% of the cases? If so, it stays there. Let's say it's not. Now I will go to my second question. Does the agent figure it out alone? For example, in this agents.md, we have an overview of the folder structure, what can be relevant to understand how the project is organized. But actually, the agent can find that on its own. So on such cases, I will delete that section. And finally, I ask if the section that I'm looking at is specific enough. If it's something that only executes in certain conditions, only applies in certain conditions. On such cases, I usually have 2 different alternatives. One of them is if I'm using something like Claude Code, I can use rules. Rules in certain cases, I can scope them to a given folder or to a given file type. So that's generally a good approach to put those things that are a bit more specific to a framework, to a language. Otherwise, what I can do is that I can decide to move some of those things into an agent skill. Let's say that I have an instruction as part of my agents.md that knows how to create a database migration. How do I prefer my database migrations to be created? Which parameters do I provide, for example? So on such cases, what I do is that since that is specific enough, is something that only happens once in a while, is something that is related to a specific use case, what I like to do is that I will extract that into an agent skill. By applying these 3 questions, I can simplify my agents.md. And also, I can keep an accurate workflow in my day-to-day where the agent keeps contributing in a positive way. However, there's an important remark here, and the remark is related to the agent's skills. Before you conclude that the agent skills is the way to replace all the things that are inside of your claude.md or your agents.md, just wait for a bit. Why? Because we are also concluding as an industry, there's a couple of reports online as well that show that they are not that reliable. At least the self-discovery process is not that reliable. If you are expecting that the agent will be able to run every single agent skill when it's needed, according to some reports, it often ignores a couple of them. Let's say that you run the same prompt multiple times. Sometimes it might pick up one skill, other times it might pick up other. According to some reports, if you have more than 3 agent skills, the performance or the accuracy starts to decrease. That means that you can't expect the agent skills to run on its own 100% of the times that is needed. So you still need to be the steward of this process. For those things that you move out of your agents.md, keep in mind that they need to be things that you would notice when they don't happen, and you have ways to run them manually, because you can always call the agent's skills like if it was a command that you can run on demand. But you need to have a way that you understand that step missed in the process. Okay, at least for now, that's happening with agents. I believe that in the future that will change. So now go ahead and review your agents.md. And to simplify that process, I have linked in the description a quick guide, an audit guide that you can go through it like a checklist in order to apply those 3 questions that I mentioned before. I hope you found this video useful, and if you like this one, I bet you like this one as well. And I will see you in the next one.